Hello, hello. Welcome back to Retrieving Sanity with your host, Keegan. Today, I just want to talk on the subject of the stigma of being an addict. Now, the stigma is pretty invasive, it's everywhere, really, and it's interesting. But first, let's start with describing or getting the Google definition of a stigma. Google states that a stigma is a disgrace associated with a particular circumstance. It's kind of harsh, right? Disgrace, like, ouch. So, with this disgrace, it kind of makes one feel less than, right? And I say less than because, well, it lowers you on the social status ladder, cast, whatever you want to say, down quite a bit. And by down quite a bit, I mean you're on one of the low ends from what I've at least experienced or have seen. And although this may be the case, it's not quite what you think. Bear with me. So, this quote unquote disgrace of being an addict, first, it really gets into the psyche of the addict themselves. And whenever this happens, it's like, who am I, really? Or it kind of also comes off as the whole, well, if I am an addict, I might as well act like one. And that's where some people go wayward with it. And a lot of people think addict and associate it with criminality. And they're not particularly wrong, but they're also not right. I will say they are right in the sense that most substances that are used or associated with being an addict, well, are illegal, but for stupid reasons, and that is another episode. But let's see. The same can be said with an alcoholic. And for an alcoholic, it sucks because your substance of choice is, well, everywhere. And by everywhere, I mean literally everywhere. So, I mean, I don't even have to go into detail. Just, I can go basically anywhere that I can buy stuff, and it's probably there. Anyways, with this mindset that someone is an addict, therefore equals bad, people will immediately put you or put that person in such a low mindset, they won't even give them the time of day a lot of the time. And again, it's not quite what you think for some. But let's get back to the addict. So, the addict now has a stigma to fight against. And it's not just against society, it's not against other people's perception of them, it's the addict's perception of themselves. Again, I had said, well, if I'm an addict, if I'm an alcoholic, I might as well act like one. Do what everyone is already thinking I'm doing because, well, why would I not? Right? And that's where a lot of people will go wayward with it and sometimes take it too far. But let's say you have another just average Joe and grew up decent and had the quote unquote average life and just got afflicted with this disease of choice. And now he has to try to maintain his normalcy, but as soon as the cat is out of the bag to those around him, those people will usually start treating him in such a way that messes with the psyche that makes him go, well, fuck it, because why not? And that's where the identity part comes into play, because if I'm an addict, what else am I? Am I anything else, or am I just that? Just an addict? And I think a lot of it really comes from the upbringing. And for this reason, I want to say we are making a change, and for the positive. So, whenever we think of this addict doing what an addict does, right? He or she is now sitting there and wondering, well, what do I do? And the answer is, well, first admit there's a problem. But that's the thing. If there's not much of a problem, well, the cycle continues. If there is enough of a problem, then either that person admits it or they don't. And in my case, what happened was I admitted it and I did nothing about it for quite a while. And so you can't just admit that you are an addict or an alcoholic. You have to do something about it. You have to take some kind of action. And it's difficult because, again, you're sacrificing part of your identity for something that you have no idea about. And maybe you had this kind of influence in your life and you did know something about recovery, and that's awesome because now you know what you can do. But for those that don't, it's scary. And this is why a lot of people will not go and admit to other people or go get help. It's because they're afraid of the stigma, the social backlash of describing themselves as an addict or alcoholic. And I can tell you right now that the community that I've met of alcoholics and addicts, again, they're some of the nicest, kindest, caring, smartest people I've ever known. It's weird, but it's amazing at the same time. So, whenever someone says that they are an addict, again, most people will sit there and think in the negative. Well, here's something for you. Whenever I was in middle school, we actually did something that was really kind of cool. Opened my eyes at a rather young age. And what we did, the teacher presented a list of traits and then said, is this a good person or a bad person? And the traits went from positive to negative. And then she wrote, presented the next set of traits. And they were inversed and said, is this person a good person or a bad person? And everyone was like, bad, right? Well, turns out it was the same person, just a different first impression. And that is why people say that first impressions count. One thing that I had learned while I was at the Men of Nehemiah was that you lead with your testimony, you lead with your story. And I thought it was the stupidest piece of advice. And I was wrong because remember being afraid of telling others about being an addict or alcoholic? It gets entirely dispelled whenever you actually lead with your testimony, your recovery. And it it blew my mind because I was expecting the whole you're an alcoholic, so I'm not going to give you the time of day. And the first time I did this was at the vape shop down in Forney, City Sky High Vapes, something like that. But person asked where I was from, and I told them my story, how I wound up down in Dallas, and that I was in a recovery program. And they were like, dude, that's badass. Way to go. Get clean, get sober, stay strong. And I was like, what? Like, did that just happen? And got a fist bump. And dude, that just made my week whenever that happened because I was so dumbfounded. And it got me thinking that piece of uh, advice, it really actually made sense after that. And since then, I can tell you that it has made a difference in people's lives because, again, whenever you hear the word addict and alcoholic, you probably get this negative mindset, maybe not mindset, but perception of this person. And it's funny because if you throw in the words in recovery, the perception switches right away. And it was so interesting because it showed me that this generation is doing something about that. We're changing the way that our society views those that are afflicted with the disease of choice. And I think that in itself is amazing. Now, I'm not saying that everyone that hears addict or alcoholic in recovery or a recovering alcoholic, addict, however you want to put it, not everyone is going to have that perception switch. They're not going to automatically be like, oh, this person is trying to improve their life. They're trying to grow. Good for them. Nah, some people are still going to sit there and be like, addict, alcoholic, I don't want anything to do with you. And to those people, I say, not going to say it. Anyways, yeah, it's been an interesting experience watching people do this because one of the things I really, really was not expecting was that I've seen more doors, more opportunities come across for those that have told people openly that they are an addict slash alcoholic. And that has blown my mind. These people, and sometimes they can be complete strangers, can sit there and notice that that person is being vulnerable, honest, and trying to get better. And they know not everything is going to be handed to this person. This person is fighting the good fight, if you will. And they hand them equipment to deal with it. And I'm it's so strange because again, I the way that everything had always been presented to me growing up about an addict or an alcoholic equaled bad, right? I didn't even really know what recovery was until probably early high school, I think. And even then, I was still like, no, they're not great people. I'm never going to be that. And uh, I can thank Dare. Hang on, 3, 2. So I can thank Dare, the Red Ribbon Week. Sorry, that gets my speech impediment going. And all the early preventative 3, 2. There. So I can thank all the preventative methods of trying to educate the young on what an addict is and why drugs are bad for this messed up mindset, because they were treating it as if they were all cops. Some of them were, but the thing is that they were taking the human element out. They were taking the actual person behind the drugs out. They were focusing solely on the drugs. And if you know anything about a lot of the quote unquote war on drugs, it's not so much the war on drugs, it's more of class warfare. And it's funny because guess what? The disease of choice does not give a shit about who you are. It'll come for you and it'll take you down, and it will win unless you do something. And it's not easy, but there is something to say that those who go through it and come out on the other side and actually grow from it, how amazing it really is. Because again, it's just one of those things that it has changed my life, not just because I'm going through it, it's because the perception that I had from it at a young age to where I am now is the exact opposite. An addict or alcoholic is no longer just an addict or an alcoholic. They are now someone that is in pain, someone that is suffering. And now I can see it as something that can and should be treated as such. And I think we are on the right path, because the stigma of being an alcoholic or addict is much less of a disgrace than it used to be. But it's still a work in progress. It's not going to be perfect. I don't think there really is a way to perfect how we view and handle it, but I can say we are on the right path. And for those who are still suffering, still going through it, have relapsed, have recovered again, and still quite not sure what to do, I can tell you that from my experience from the stories that I've heard that for once I can look at the end of the tunnel and I can tell you that the end of the tunnel is not on fire, and it feels so good. So that, my friends, is how the stigma of being an addict and alcoholic have kind of changed from a disgrace to something beautiful. Now, this is almost the end of season 1. Check out season 2 whenever we have co-host Simba and, well, just a change. A good change, but a change is coming. So, make sure you check in, tell your friends, tell your tell your families, and until then, Shalom.